Supreme Court makes a very substantial ruling in the Kari Lake case. You see the order here coming down, filed March 22nd, 2023. And Kari Lake submitted a petition to the Supreme Court that had a slew of different issues in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the court said that most of these are not sufficient. They're not worthy of sending back down to the lower level court. But one does survive. It's issue number 6. And so we'll come back on this. You can see this is the actual petition that Kari Lake submitted some time ago. The Supreme Court just issued an order on this. And so let's start with the order itself before we key in on what parts of Kari Lake's petition survives. So this was the order. Arizona Supreme Court came down, as we said, March 22nd. Here's the order. On December 24th, the trial court issued its under advisement ruling rejecting Laches' challenge to the election. Kari Lake filed her petition. The court en banc granted the motion for expedited consideration, and the court has considered it, along with the responses filed by Hobbs and everybody else. And the court is also considering the Court of Appeals rulings and so on and so forth, and therefore, upon consideration en banc, the court says it is ordered denying review of issues 1 through 5 and 7. The Court of Appeals aptly resolved these issues, most of which were the subject of evidentiary proceedings in the trial court. And they say Kari Lake's challenges on these grounds are insufficient to warrant the requested relief. And so we'll come back and we'll break this down. I want to go back to the petition and see what those were. But it also says, and this is the big saving grace for Kari Lake, this is what keeps the potential challenge alive as it goes back down to the lower level court. Court says it is further ordered, granting review of issue number 6 to the extent count 3 of the complaint challenges the county recorder's application of signature verification policies during the election, matching the signatures. And I voted here in Arizona. And I went in and I signed the thing, and she said it didn't really match up or something. And so, let me check this and let me check this. And it's supposed to match, but I went and voted in person. I didn't vote by mail. So what happens if I sign that and it doesn't really match? Do they just kind of shove it through anyways? I don't know. Issue number 6 asks the following question. Did the panel err in dismissing the signature verification claim on laches? So signature verification on its own is an issue. We're going to ask about that. But laches was the basis for dismissing this claim. Kari Lake says, you weren't doing the signature verification appropriately. And they said, we're not even going to ask about that, about whether you were doing the signature verification appropriately or not. All we're going to ask about is whether you even have the ability to ask about the signature verification, not about whether it was actually functional. There's a difference. And she said, or the court said, that Kari Lake couldn't even ask about signature verification due to laches. And this is kind of like a standing argument. We talked a lot about standing here, where various Trump lawsuits were all rejected. You don't have the ability to file this lawsuit because of standing. This is a different concept, but it's also in the preliminary stages of a case. Can you even bring a claim? Laches, if we go over to the law dictionary, they say that it is negligence. You are doing something wrong by not doing something, okay? It's the omission of something which a party might do or which somebody is reasonably expected to do. You're remiss. You were dilatory. You had unreasonable or unexcused delay. In other words, Kari Lake should have brought this signature verification problem up way before she ever filed this claim, is what the Court of Appeals and the lower level courts were saying. That you can't not take action, and then when the problem happens, sort of knowing there's a problem coming, and then when the problem happens, say, see, I told you so. They're saying you should have brought it sooner. And the Court of Appeals affirmed that, and the Supreme Court says, no, not so fast. They said that dismissing that issue just on the basis of laches might have been mischaracterizing Lake's claim as a challenge to the existing signature verification policies when Lake, in fact, alleged that Maricopa failed to follow these policies during the 2022 election. That's the question being asked. In count 3 of her complaint, which we'll read through, Kari Lake is alleging, she says, a material number of early ballots cast in November were transmitted in envelopes containing an affidavit signature that the Maricopa County Recorder and her designee did not match the signature in the putative voters registration record. So, Arizona, you've got the mail-in ballot, you've got an envelope, you insert it into, you sign the envelope, put the whole thing in another envelope, mail it off, and then they've got to make sure that your signature matches the record, right, on file. When I went in person, I signed the screen, and I probably just went like this, like this, like almost with my forehead, just like, signing it like this, like we normally do. And then it didn't match or whatever, and then she came up and matched me, said, "Oh, okay, your ID, you are this person. Okay, perfect. You're here. Vote." I voted, and I checked everything, and boom, right, that's what it was. Got my ballot, filled it out, turned it in. I had no problems. But what happens if I would have mailed it in? What if it's somebody down there who just says, well, this is close enough. Let me see here. Okay, this is a Trump, we're not talking about Trump, we're talking about, this is a Kari Lake vote. Kari Lake, this signature doesn't match. We'll put that over in this bin. This one's a vote for Katie Hobbs. Oh, that signature looks perfect. Love it. And they just skit that one through. So the Maricopa County Recorder accepted, according to Kari Lake, a material number of these early ballots, right? There's enough of those in that bucket where the signatures don't match that it impacted processing and tabulation. Contrary to the ruling of the trial court, says the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals opinion, this signature verification challenge is to the application of the policies, not to the policies themselves. So the lower level courts were saying, hey, Kari Lake, if you didn't like the signature process that we had in place, you should have challenged that before the election. You waited too long, and therefore you don't get to challenge our signature verification policies anymore. And the Supreme Court is saying, she's not challenging the policies. Hello. She's challenging the application of the policies. She's saying that they weren't enacted appropriately, which is why a bunch of either valid ballots that should have been counted were not counted, or a bunch of ballots that were counted should not have been counted. Therefore, they say, the Supreme Court, because it's about the application of the policy and not about the existence of the policy, which they say would have been barred by laches. You should have challenged the existence of the policies before the election, but you're not challenging the existence, the application, and so therefore, that's valid, is what the court says. Therefore, it was erroneous to dismiss this claim under the doctrine of laches. She couldn't have brought anything earlier. She didn't delay. She wasn't remiss in bringing something, because how could she have known that they would have applied it so unevenly, so unfairly? Because Lake could not have brought this challenge before the election. Therefore, it is further ordered vacating the Court of Appeals opinion in that case. It is further ordered remanding to the trial court, lower level court, to determine whether the claim that Arizona failed to comply with the rules can be dismissed for reasons other than laches, basically. Whether it fails to state a claim other than laches. So this is not saying that this claim is successful at all. It's just saying that the basis for the dismissal of the claim was on a bad foundation. Laches was the justification for dismissing it. That's not enough to dismiss it here. So they're saying, you guys, please feel free to find another reason to dismiss it. And I'm sure that they will try very hard to do that. So that's going back down. Is there another way you can dismiss this? Try again. You can't dismiss it on this one, so try again. Or in the alternative, right, if you're not going to dismiss it for another reason, or whether Kari Lake can prove her claim under the law and establish this. Okay, so this is what Kari Lake has to do. Establish that votes were affected in sufficient numbers to alter the outcome of the election. Okay, that's a big ask. This is where we started to have problems with during the presentation of evidence at the lower level court proceedings that we covered here. They were getting close. They were getting in the neighborhood, but it wasn't close enough to check the elements of what they needed to check in order to make the claim survive. So they're going to have to come back and do this. They got to get a big number of votes, enough to change the actual outcome. And it can't just be contemplated changes, right? It can't just be, it could have changed, or we found a big number of votes. It's got to be more than that. It has to be based, and this is a high standard. So keep this in mind. When the lower level court gets this, they're going to receive this back from the Supreme Court. They're going to try to either find a basis to dismiss it, which is going to be easy. That's kind of a low bar because everything else has been dismissed thus far. Or they're going to ask Kari Lake to meet a high standard, which is based on a competent mathematical basis to conclude that the outcome would plausibly have been different, right? And not simply an untethered assertion of uncertainty. See the difference there? So when Kari Lake was presenting her evidence in court, we heard from a lot of very, very, I think, competent people who knew all sorts of details about what went wrong here. And we even heard from Richard Barris, right, the People's Pollster. And he said that there was a ton of uncertainty, right? And he explained all the numbers, and there were buckets and ballots. And if you suppress, 3 or 4 hours of voting in some key precincts around Arizona because the machines aren't working in the early morning hours of the day, yeah, that increases uncertainty, and that might alter the course of the election if that had changed differently. But it's got to be a conclusion, right? A mathematical basis, something that's competent to conclude that the outcome would have been different, and not just about uncertainty. So they've got to come up with some hard numbers. I was critical about Kari Lake and the not her, but about the presentation, because they didn't check the boxes that they needed to check. This time, they've got to do that, right? It can't just be an abstract idea that maybe people didn't vote because they were suppressed or anything. It's got to be a conclusion with some level of certainty from competent mathematical evidence saying that it could have plausibly been different. If they can hit that standard, that will be very, very good. It is further ordered petitioner may file a response and respondents may file a reply, also talking about sanctions. We'll deal with sanctions later. But I think the argument for sanctions is a lot less strong now because her claims have some merit. This one survived at the Supreme Court. The record does not reflect that the 35,000 unaccounted ballots were added to the total count. The motion for sanctions will be considered in due course. Signed off by Chief Justice Robert Brutenell, copied to a bunch of people involved in the case. And so Kari Lake's claims, they survive. It's actually kind of a win for her because now she's got some options. She can present a little bit more evidence and try to make that claim, presumably, if she's allowed to re-argue some of that stuff down at the lower level court. We'll see what the lower level court does with this, but pretty amazing. Just to recap what this claim was all about, Kari Lake, the petition for a review of a special action decision with the Court of Appeals, and she gave us a lot here. Just briefly show you this. Said that there were problems with the chain of custody, testing, signature verification. There were due process problems, equal protection problems. We talked a lot about that. I mean, if your vote counts and somebody else's vote doesn't count, that's an equal protection problem. Their vote's worth more than yours. So if your vote was mailed in and it counted and you went to go stand in line and you weren't able to vote, then your vote was suppressed, wasn't it? They said that the Court of Appeals applied the wrong standards, and the various claims, right, the various issues were all dismissed. And we have those articulated here. Different standards. The one that did survive is count 6 or issue 6. Did the panel err in dismissing the claims based on laches? Supreme Court said yes. So that will go back down. Kari Lake is going to live to fight another day, and we'll, of course, continue to cover it. It's going to be fun to see what happens here in Arizona. Hopefully, we don't have to live another 4 years with Katie Hobbs, but we'll see.